The iconic Rambo knife almost wasn't in the movie at all, was deemed too campy for featuring a throwable blade attachment, and sparked controversy when sold as a real weapon to children for just $5. From a knife maker's bold claim about slicing through aircraft to Stallone filming knife-forging scenes for 15 hours straight while burning through 11 pairs of gloves, the survival blade that defined action cinema has a backstory as wild as the movies themselves. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about the Rambo knife. Fact 1. The knife wasn't in the original novel. If you've only seen the Rambo movies, you might assume that the iconic survival knife has always been part of the character's identity, but that's actually not true at all. When author David Morrell wrote his novel First Blood back in 1972, the character known simply as Rambo didn't carry any knife whatsoever. The book featured a troubled Vietnam War veteran who wages a brutal one-man war against local police in Kentucky, but he does this without the legendary blade that would later become synonymous with the character. In fact, the novel's Rambo obtains weapons from fallen pursuers during the story, but a signature survival knife was never part of his original arsenal. When the book was finally adapted into a film 10 years later in 1982, it was actually Sylvester Stallone himself who came up with the idea of giving Rambo a knife. Stallone was already a knife enthusiast and collector in his personal life, and he felt strongly that the character needed something iconic to carry throughout the film. According to Stallone, he wanted the knife to be more than just a tool or weapon in the movie. He specifically said he wanted to make the knife into a character itself, giving it a presence and personality that would make it memorable to audiences. This creative decision turned out to be brilliant because the knife went on to become one of the most recognizable movie props in cinema history. It's fascinating to think that without Stallone's personal passion for knives and his vision for the character, the Rambo knife might never have existed at all, and the entire franchise would have looked completely different without this defining element that helped make Rambo an action movie legend. Fact 2. Replicas have the wrong sawback design. Here's something that drives serious Rambo knife collectors absolutely crazy, and it's a mystery that has never been properly explained even after all these years. The official licensed replica knives that were mass-produced and sold to the public feature 12 serrated teeth along the spine of the blade, but if you look closely at the actual knife used by Sylvester Stallone in the original First Blood movie, you'll clearly see that it has 14 teeth instead. This might seem like a small detail that wouldn't matter much, but for fans and collectors who want an accurate reproduction of the screen used knife, it's a pretty significant difference that's immediately noticeable when you compare the two versions side by side. What makes this situation even stranger is that the replicas don't just have the wrong number of teeth, they actually use a completely different sawback design that's based on the knife from the second Rambo movie rather than the first one. The official replicas feature a scaled-down version of the sawback pattern from Rambo First Blood Part 2, which has a different tooth shape and configuration compared to the original First Blood knife. To this day, nobody in the knife collecting community or among the manufacturers has been able to provide a clear explanation for why this error was made in the first place. Some fans have speculated that it might have been a cost-cutting measure or perhaps a miscommunication during the manufacturing process. But the truth is that no one really knows for certain. The replicas were originally produced by United Cutlery and later by Master Cutlery after the license changed hands, but both companies continued using the incorrect sawback design, making it one of the most obvious and persistent inaccuracies in movie replica knife history. Fact 3. The designer claimed it could cut aircraft. Jimmy Lyle, the legendary Arkansas knifesmith who designed and hand-forged the original Rambo knife, made an incredibly bold claim about his creation that sounds almost too extreme to be true. According to Lyle himself, the blade he crafted from 440C high-carbon steel was strong and sharp enough to actually cut through the fuselage of an aircraft, which is a pretty extraordinary statement for any knife maker to make about their work. Lyle wasn't just throwing around wild marketing hype either, because he was a highly respected professional craftsman who took his work very seriously and had a reputation to protect in the knife-making community. When the movie producers first approached him about creating a knife for First Blood, they specifically told him that they didn't want just another useless movie prop that would look good on camera but couldn't actually function in real life. Instead, they asked Lyle to design and build a legitimate survival tool that could genuinely perform all the tasks that would be required of it if someone actually needed to survive in the wilderness. Lyle took this challenge seriously and created a knife with a full tang construction and a blade made from premium steel that could handle real-world use, including chopping wood, cutting through various materials, and maintaining a sharp edge even under demanding conditions. The knife featured a hollow waterproof handle that could store survival supplies, serrated teeth on the spine for sawing, and a blade guard with built-in screwdrivers. Lyle's claim about cutting through aircraft fuselage was his way of emphasizing just how tough and capable his design really was, showing that this wasn't some flimsy prop, but rather a serious piece of survival equipment that could handle extreme situations. Fact 4. Only 100 original numbered knives exist. When Jimmy Lyle created the iconic First Blood knife for the movie, he didn't just make a handful for filming and then walk away from the project like you might expect. Instead, he produced a very limited run of exactly 100 numbered knives total, making these original pieces incredibly rare and highly sought after by collectors today. The distribution of these numbered knives followed a specific pattern that Lyle carefully documented in his personal record book. Knife numbers 1 through 6 were sent directly to Sylvester Stallone to be used during the actual filming of First Blood, and these are the knives that appear on screen throughout the movie. Numbers 7 through 13 were originally kept by Jimmy Lyle himself for his personal collection, though he eventually sold these knives later on. The remaining knives, numbered 14 through 100, were offered for sale to the general public and collectors who wanted to own an authentic piece of movie history. What makes this situation even more interesting is that these numbered knives weren't all exactly identical to each other, because there were subtle but noticeable differences between the various batches that Lyle produced. The most significant difference was in the sawback design along the spine of the blade. The first 13 knives, which included both Stallone's screen-used knives and Lyle's personal collection pieces, all featured 14 saw teeth on the spine. However, the knives numbered 14 through 100 that were sold to collectors featured 12 saw teeth instead, representing a deliberate design change that Lyle made after completing the initial batch. Some of the early numbered knives, up to number 30, also had a deeper blade grind under the saw teeth, matching the exact style of the movie knives, while later numbered pieces had a different finish in that area. Fact 5. Children's toy versions sparked controversy. In what seems absolutely shocking by today's safety standards, numerous manufacturers rushed to capitalize on the success of First Blood by producing cheap knockoff versions of the Rambo Knife that were specifically marketed and sold as toys for children. These weren't harmless plastic replicas or foam props like you might expect from modern toy companies, but rather actual functional knives with real metal blades that could genuinely cut and potentially cause serious injury. Even more incredibly, these knockoff children's versions included legitimate survival kits inside the hollow handles, just like the authentic knife from the movie, complete with matches, fishing hooks, and other small tools that were clearly not appropriate for young kids to be playing with unsupervised. The manufacturers sold these crude replicas for approximately $5 each, making them affordable impulse purchases that parents could easily buy for their children without thinking too carefully about the potential dangers involved. To make the toys more appealing to kids, the companies produced the knife handles in a wide variety of bright colors and patterns, including camouflage designs, which made them look more like playthings than the serious survival tools they actually were underneath the colorful exterior. This entire situation naturally sparked significant controversy and concern among parents, safety advocates, and consumer protection groups who were understandably alarmed that real functional weapons were being mass-produced and marketed directly to children as movie tie-in merchandise. The fact that these knives featured actual sharp blades and came with fire-starting materials and other potentially dangerous items made the controversy even more serious, as it raised legitimate questions about product safety regulations and responsible marketing practices during the early 1980s, when such standards were apparently much more relaxed than they are today. Fact 6. Original knives now sell for $75,000 plus. If you happen to own one of the original numbered Jimmy Lyle First Blood knives, you're essentially sitting on a small fortune, because these rare pieces have become some of the most valuable movie memorabilia items in the entire knife collecting world. When these authentic handmade knives occasionally become available for sale, they command absolutely staggering prices that reflect both their historical significance and extreme rarity. The minimum price for a numbered original First Blood knife starts at around $15,000, and that's only if you're lucky enough to find one available for purchase at all, since many collectors who own them have no interest in selling regardless of the price being offered. Some of the rarest examples, particularly the lower numbered knives from the first batch or those with special provenance and documentation, have sold at auction for over $75,000, which is an absolutely incredible amount of money for a single knife. The most significant auction event in the history of these collectible knives took place on September 11, 2019, when the Dallas Auction Gallery held what they described as the largest collection of original Jimmy Lyle knives ever offered at auction in one place. This remarkable sale featured over 100 authentic Lyle Rambo knives from various models, including First Blood, Rambo, the Mission from the second film, and other rare variants that Lyle had created throughout his career. The collection included extremely rare pieces such as numbered sets, prototype knives, and even special presentation pieces that Lyle had made as one-of-a-kind custom orders. The auction was conducted with no reserve prices, meaning that every single knife was guaranteed to sell regardless of the final bid amount, which created intense excitement and competition among serious collectors who knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Fact 7. The Rambo 3 knife had a rejected spring-loaded feature. When legendary knife maker Gil Hibben was designing the knife for Rambo 3, he came up with an incredibly creative but ultimately rejected feature that would have made the weapon far more elaborate and fantastical than what audiences eventually saw on screen. Hibben's original design concept included a spring-loaded secondary blade that could be inserted horizontally into the distinctive slot that runs through the middle of the Rambo 3 knife, which you can still see in the final movie version, even though it no longer serves its originally intended purpose. The way this mechanism was supposed to work was pretty wild, because the secondary blade could be ejected from the slot at the press of a button and then thrown at enemies like a deadly throwing star, giving Rambo an additional ranged weapon option during combat situations. Hibben also envisioned that this secondary blade could be used in an axe-like chopping motion while still attached to the main knife, providing even more versatility to the already impressive design. However, when Sylvester Stallone saw this prototype feature, he felt that it was simply too campy and over the top even for an action movie. So he rejected the spring-loaded blade concept and asked Hibben to simplify the design for the final production version. Because this feature was abandoned so early in the development process, only 2 prototype knives were ever made with the functional spring-loaded blade mechanism intact. Gil Hibben kept one of these extremely rare prototypes in his personal collection, where it remains to this day as a fascinating piece of movie memorabilia history. The second prototype was owned by Stallone himself until 2015, when he decided to auction it off to a lucky collector who now possesses one of only 2 knives in existence with this unique rejected feature. Fact 8. A deleted forging scene taught Stallone real skills. During the production of Rambo 3. Back in 1988, Gil Hibben created a special instructional video specifically designed to teach Sylvester Stallone the authentic process of forging a knife by hand, because the original script for the movie included a scene where Rambo would create his own weapon from scratch. Hibben's training video walked Stallone through all the essential steps of traditional knife making, including how to properly heat the metal in a forge, when to remove it for hammering, how to shape the blade by striking it repeatedly on an anvil, and the crucial process of quenching the hot steel in water to temper and harden it correctly. Stallone took this training seriously and actually filmed the knife forging scene for Rambo 3, complete with all the realistic details that Hibben had taught him about metalworking and blacksmithing techniques. However, when the editors were putting together the final cut of the film, they decided to remove this entire sequence from the theatrical release, and the forging scene ended up on the cutting room floor, where it would eventually appear years later as a deleted scene on special edition home video releases. Even though this particular scene never made it into Rambo 3, the training that Stallone received from Gil Hibben turned out to be incredibly valuable, and definitely wasn't wasted effort. When Stallone returned to play Rambo again in the fourth movie, released in 2008, the script called for an extended knife forging sequence that became a memorable part of that film. Because Stallone had already learned the proper techniques years earlier for Rambo 3, he was able to perform the forging scenes convincingly and knew exactly what he was doing on camera. This same training came in handy once again for Rambo Last Blood, when more metalworking scenes were required for the story. Fact 9. Stallone filmed for 15 hours straight, forging the Rambo War. When it came time to film the knife forging sequence for Rambo 4, Sylvester Stallone pushed himself through one of the most physically demanding and grueling shooting sessions of his entire career, staying up throughout the entire night to capture this important scene. Stallone reportedly spent approximately 15 consecutive hours working with the forge, anvil, and red-hot metal to get all the footage that the production needed for the final cut of the film. What made this marathon filming session particularly brutal was the fact that the production was facing serious time constraints that prevented them from following the normal safety protocols and cooling periods that would typically be used when working with heated metal and forging equipment. Because they needed to complete the scene quickly and couldn't afford to keep stopping and waiting for the metal to cool down between takes, Stallone had to keep working with dangerously hot materials throughout the entire 15-hour period without taking proper breaks. The intense heat from the forge and the repeatedly heated blade took a severe toll on Stallone's hands, despite the protective gloves he was wearing, and according to reports from the set, the production went through a total of 11 different pairs of heat-protective gloves that either burned through, wore out, or became too damaged to continue using safely. When Stallone later talked about this experience, he joked that after spending all night handling extremely hot metal and working so close to the forge fires, he ended up with what he humorously described as a rather warm handshake by the time filming finally wrapped. The scene was particularly important to Stallone because it showed Rambo creating his own weapon out of necessity, symbolizing his self-reliance and resourcefulness as a character. Fact 10. The wrong prototype. Accidentally appeared on film one of the most embarrassing continuity errors in the entire Rambo franchise happened during the filming of Rambo 3, and it involved using the completely wrong knife during an important action sequence without anyone on set realizing the mistake until it was far too late to fix it. During the tense minefield sequence where Rambo is carefully searching for hidden explosives buried in the sand, the props department accidentally provided Stallone with one of Gil Hibben's early prototype knives instead of the final approved design that was supposed to be used throughout the rest of the movie. This prototype knife had a significantly different appearance from the official Rambo 3 knife, most notably featuring many more saw teeth along the spine of the blade compared to the final version that audiences were familiar with from other scenes in the film. The crew filmed the entire minefield sequence using this incorrect prototype without noticing that it didn't match the knife used in the rest of the production. And by the time the producers and editors discovered the continuity error during post-production, they faced a serious dilemma about what to do. The production had already moved far beyond that point in the shooting schedule, making it incredibly expensive and logistically difficult to go back and reshoot the entire minefield sequence just to correct the knife error. After weighing their options and considering the costs involved, the producers decided to leave the scene in the final cut of the movie and hope that audiences wouldn't notice the discrepancy. Fortunately for the filmmakers, the minefield sequence was shot with very poor lighting that kept much of the action in shadow and darkness, which meant that most viewers watching the film in theaters never realized they were looking at a completely different knife than the one Rambo carries throughout the rest of Rambo 3. Fact 11. The knife never drew blood in First Blood. Here's something that surprises almost everyone who watches the original First Blood movie, especially considering how the Rambo franchise later became known for extreme violence and high body counts in the sequels. Despite the fact that the iconic survival knife gets plenty of screen time and looks incredibly menacing throughout the film, it never actually kills a single person or even seriously injures anyone during the entire story. Rambo uses the knife extensively for various survival purposes like building traps, hunting wild animals for food, making shelters, and creating improvised weapons, but he never once stabs or slashes any of the police officers or National Guard troops who are pursuing him through the wilderness. The knife does appear in several tense confrontational moments, most memorably when Rambo holds it against Sheriff Teasel's throat and warns him not to push the situation any further. But even in that scene, Rambo shows restraint and doesn't actually harm the sheriff with the blade. In fact, the entire movie First Blood contains only a single death from beginning to end, and that death is completely accidental rather than intentional on Rambo's part. The unfortunate victim is Deputy Art Galt, who falls to his death from a police helicopter after Rambo throws a rock at the aircraft's windshield in self-defense while Galt is trying to shoot him from above. The rock causes the pilot to lose control momentarily, and Galt loses his balance and plummets from the open door of the helicopter. This remarkably low body count and the complete absence of any knife kills makes First Blood dramatically different in tone from the later Rambo films, where the knife becomes a lethal weapon that Rambo uses to dispatch numerous enemies in increasingly graphic ways throughout the sequels. Fact 12. Jimmy Lyle started as a coal miner's son. Making file knives. The man who would eventually become famous as the legendary creator of the Rambo knife came from extremely humble beginnings that had nothing to do with professional knife making or metalworking of any kind. James Buell Lyle, who everyone knew as Jimmy, was born and raised in Russellville, Arkansas, where his father worked as a coal miner to support the family during the difficult economic times of the 1930s and 40s. Young Jimmy made his very first knife at the remarkably early age of just 11 years old, and he did it using nothing more than an old, worn-out metal file that he patiently ground down by hand until it had a sharp edge and resembled something like a functional blade. This early childhood project sparked a lifelong passion for knife making, but it would be many years before Lyle could pursue that interest as anything more than an occasional hobby. After finishing his education, Lyle spent his young adult years working in a variety of different careers that had nothing whatsoever to do with creating knives or working with metal professionally. He worked as a high school teacher for several years, educating young students in Arkansas, and he also served his country by joining the United States Army for a period of military service. Following his time in the Army, Lyle built a career as a construction contractor, managing building projects and working in the trades. It wasn't until 1971, when Lyle was already well into his adult life at 38 years old, that he finally made the bold decision to leave his construction career behind and become a full-time professional knife maker. From that point forward, Lyle dedicated himself completely to perfecting his craft and eventually earned the respected nickname, the Arkansas Knifesmith, throughout the knife collecting community. Fact 13. The teeth number has symbolic meaning. After First Blood was released, and Jimmy Lyle continued making versions of his famous survival knife for collectors and customers, he made a deliberate design change that wasn't just about aesthetics or functionality, but carried deep symbolic meaning related to the character and story. Lyle decided to reduce the number of serrated teeth along the spine of the blade from 14 down to 12, and when he explained this modification to people, he revealed that the new tooth count was actually a tribute to Rambo's military background and the brothers in arms who served alongside him. According to Lyle's own explanation, the 12 saw teeth were carefully chosen to represent two specific numbers that held significance in Rambo's fictional military history. The first number was 4, representing the total number of years that John Rambo had served in the United States Army during his military career. The second number was 8, which symbolized the 8 members of Rambo's elite Special Forces unit who had fought together during the Vietnam War, forming a tight-knit group of warriors who depended on each other for survival in combat. When you add these two meaningful numbers together, 4 years of service plus 8 team members, you get exactly 12, which is why Lyle chose that specific number of teeth for his revised design. This symbolic gesture transformed what might have seemed like a simple design modification into a meaningful tribute that honored both military service in general and the specific bonds of brotherhood that exist between soldiers who serve together in Special Forces units. The change gave the knife an additional layer of significance beyond its practical function as a survival tool, connecting it more deeply to the themes of loyalty, sacrifice, and military camaraderie that were central to the Rambo character and story. Fact 14. Stallone accidentally injured the sheriff actor with the knife. During the filming of First Blood, a painful on-set accident occurred that involved the real Rambo knife and actor Brian Dennehy, who played the antagonistic Sheriff Will Teasel in the movie. The incident happened while they were shooting the early scene where Sheriff Teasel arrests Rambo and discovers the large survival knife concealed in his waistband. As part of the scene, Dennehy's character was supposed to pull the knife from its leather sheath and examine it while questioning Rambo about why he would be carrying such a weapon. While handling the genuine Jimmy Lyle knife during this take, Dennehy accidentally jammed the sharp blade into his own hand, causing immediate and considerable pain from the injury. Despite the fact that he had just seriously hurt himself with a real knife in the middle of filming a scene, Dennehy made the professional decision to keep going and continue performing his lines without stopping or calling for a break. The pain from the accidental stabbing wound was intense enough that it actually affected Dennehy's facial expressions in ways he couldn't completely control, causing a noticeable twitch in his eye, blinking that happened repeatedly throughout the remainder of the take. The director and editors apparently decided that this take was good enough to use in the final version of the throwable movie, so the footage where Dennehy is visibly struggling with the pain from his injured hand made it all the way through post-production and into the theatrical release. Years later, Dennehy talked about this incident during an interview on the Merv Griffin talk show, where he explained exactly what had happened on set that day and confirmed that the unusual eye twitching that viewers can see in the finished film was a direct result of him trying to push through the scene while dealing with genuine physical pain. Fact 15. The Rambo 3 knife became the best-selling replica ever. Gil Hibben's distinctive design for the Rambo 3 knife turned out to be not just visually impressive on screen, but also an absolute phenomenon in terms of commercial success when replica versions were manufactured and sold to the general public. The factory-produced replicas made by United Cutlery became one of the biggest-selling production knives in the entire history of the knife industry, with total worldwide sales reaching over 250,000 units, which is an absolutely staggering number for any knife model. This massive commercial success helped establish a brand new market for licensed movie replica knives that hadn't really existed before, proving that there was enormous consumer demand for authentic-looking versions of weapons featured in popular films. However, what many buyers of these replica knives probably didn't realize at the time of purchase was that the United Cutlery versions were actually significantly smaller than the genuine handmade knife that Gil Hibben created for use in the actual movie production. The factory replicas measure 1 3/8 inches shorter in overall length compared to the real screen-used knife, which represents a substantial size reduction that changes the proportions and impact of the design. The authentic movie knife that Stallone wielded on camera is an absolutely massive blade that measures nearly as long as Stallone's entire torso when held up against his body, making it one of the most oversized and dramatic knives ever featured in an action film. This enormous size was part of what made the Rambo 3 knife so visually striking and memorable to audiences, but the scaled-down replicas lost some of that impressive presence, even though they still captured the basic design elements and distinctive features like the slot through the blade and the elaborate Bowie-style point that made Hibben's creation so recognizable and popular with collectors around the world. Collectors around the world. Collectors around the world. Collectors around the world.